When Batman Caped Crusader was first announced, I, like many people, made the assumption that this show was going to follow the path set by Batman the Animated Series. I thought it was going to be a grim, dark, more grounded Batman cartoon, focusing on more realistic crimes. And then the first trailer dropped and we got a glimpse at a very supernatural looking gentleman ghost. Needless to say, I was intrigued. Before we get to Caped Crusader's Gentleman Ghost, let's talk about his inspiration, the comic book version of the character. The original Gentleman Ghost made his first appearance in Flash Comics 88, published in 1947. At that time, Flash Comics had several backup stories featuring other heroes that couldn't sustain their own series, characters like the Atom, Black Canary, and Hawkman. Gentleman Ghost debuted in the Hawkman backup story, officially making him a Hawkman villain. During these early stories, it was never entirely clear if Gentleman Ghost was really a ghost or merely trickery from the real criminals, designed to distract Hawkman and Hawkwoman. There was always an element of doubt, usually in the form of recordings or projectors. At least until 1969's The Atom and Hawkman 43, when the Gentleman Ghost's origins were revealed. James Craddock was an English highwayman that had earned the nickname Gentleman Jim Craddock, on account of him politely tipping his hat to the victims of his robberies. Despite the name, Jim was anything but a gentleman. He'd spend his money drinking excessively in the company of women of ill repute, and that would ultimately be his downfall. One evening he was caught by the police and sentenced to be hanged by the neck until dead. Just as the hangman was about to pull the lever, Craddock swore that he would return and have his revenge. Somehow, after being executed, his spirit was propelled 150 years into the future, onto the streets of swinging London. And so Gentleman Jim, now rebranded as Gentleman Ghost, began a new campaign of terror and thievery, all in the name of lining his own pockets. As a ghost, he didn't need money anymore, but that didn't stop him from wanting it. In the 1970s, Gentleman Ghost would make the transition to becoming a Batman villain, first appearing in Batman 310. While those earlier Hawkman comics had explicitly stated that Gentleman Ghost definitely was a ghost that enjoyed toying with people to make them think he might not be, the Batman stories inverted this idea, suggesting that he was a living con man that used holograms to make people think he was a ghost. This didn't last long, however, as in Batman 319, Batman uncovers several of Gentleman Ghost's projectors, but is confronted by the ghost himself, who has a full conversation with Batman before fading away. So, no more ambiguity, Gentleman Ghost is absolutely 100% a ghost. The character transitioned to the small screen when he appeared in the Super Friends as a villain of the week. However, it must be noted that his appearance wasn't really all that significant. In the 1990s, Gentleman Ghost was mooted as a villain to appear in Batman the Animated Series, but he was quickly dismissed because the creative team wanted to avoid supernatural characters, although they would eventually relent on that. He did, however, appear in Justice League Unlimited, primarily as a background member of Gorilla Grodd's secret society, but also in the opening of the episode Ancient History. This Gentleman Ghost seems to be a faithful adaptation of the character, as he's shown flying and becoming intangible. The only thing that can harm him is the nth metal in Hawkman's equipment. Gentleman Ghost also appears in James Tucker's Batman the Brave and the Bold, again as an unambiguously spooky character. James Craddock made a deal with a demon to become immortal, but the devil was in the details, as they say. Yes, he would never truly die. When he was apprehended and executed for his crimes, his soul never left Earth, and he was left to wander endlessly, committing crime after crime for all eternity. That brings us to the version of the character seen in Batman Caped Crusader's 6th episode, Night Ride. This Gentleman Ghost, the Gentleman Ghost, they're oddly specific about that name, has a lot in common with his comic book counterpart. He is undeniably a ghost. There's not even the pretense that he could be someone posing as a ghost, aside from that being Batman's initial theory. We see him phase through solid objects, summon a spectral horse, and even freeze Batman's hand with a mere touch. This makes the Gentleman Ghost Batman's first supernatural foe, which is quite surprising for a show that had been so grounded in reality up until then. I guess it shows that nothing is off the table. It's also worth mentioning that the very earliest Batman stories had Batman face off against supernatural foes, such as the Mad Monk, who was a vampire. As for the Gentleman Ghost himself, he is the spirit of James Craddock, also known as Gentleman Jim. The Craddock family dates back to the time of the Pilgrims, and they were one of the founding families of Gotham City. However, their name was struck from the records following James's actions. The family had been given a large area of land called Heritage Hill by the King of England as a reward for their service to the crown. This already frames Jim in a poor light to Americans, who famously had a dust-up with the King of England in the 18th century. Craddock was loyal to the King of England even during said revolution and was staunchly against it. He believed that wealth was his birthright and that the less fortunate were chattel who existed solely to serve their betters, namely him. After he gambled away most of his fortune, Craddock turned to robbery. But he was a very specific kind of thief, a highwayman that targeted the poor. He refused to steal from the wealthy and would only take from the poor, an anti-Robin Hood, and earned the name Gentleman Jim due to his status within society, rather than his actions. When he was eventually caught by the authorities, he was hanged by the neck until dead, leaving his family to deal with the shame. Craddock would return some 150 years later as a spirit, doomed to repeat what he had done in life leading up to his death, stealing from the poor. Given that he was active in the 1700s, it's understandable then that his outfit would resemble what was worn at the time, rather than a white suit and a top hat. I really like how his primary colour is blue, and how the blue flames burn in his presence. It's very striking because blue isn't a colour that appears all that often in the natural world, so it immediately sets him apart as something unnatural. At the beginning of the episode, we see Craddock attacking a security van, causing it to crash. After he helps himself to the money, he offers his hand to an injured security guard, stating that the road is no place for a lady, and that she should go home before he heads off into the night, laughing. How chivalrous. Given that he was a man from the 1700s, it probably shouldn't surprise us to find that he has some outdated attitudes, even for the pseudo-1940s world that this show takes place in. He doesn't use any slurs or anything like that, but his antagonism towards people of colour is barely hidden beneath the surface. Just look at how he targets the diverse set of commuters. You could argue that it's more that he's classist, but then you'd have to ignore that most of the poor people aren't of white Anglo-Saxon descent. When Lucius Fox initiates the purchase of Heritage Hill, this summons Craddock, who is outraged that one of his descendants would stoop to selling their ancestral home to one such as Fox. He makes multiple incorrect assumptions about Fox, that he's somehow lesser and from a poor background. It's very clear that Fox is wealthy, otherwise he wouldn't be able to buy Heritage Hill, but Craddock views him as less than, simply because of his appearance. Earlier in the episode, Lucius had remarked that unlike Bruce, he had been raised to treat the help like people, indicating that he comes from a privileged background. It really does amuse me to think that the prospect of having his ancestral home sold to an African American who intended to turn the land into social housing, a school and a public park, was able to bring him back from the dead. That is some powerful racism right there. And what does this petty ghost do? He commits robberies, not out of any need for money. No, he does it simply because he feels compelled to continue acting the way he had done in the time leading up to his death. How pedestrian. Craddock demonstrates his morality when he interrupts Harvey Dent's press event on a train to rob the poor. When Dent offers his own money up to spare the members of the public, Craddock refuses, stating that he could never take money from someone of his station, but he's glad to take the money of a particularly tanned-looking gentleman. Again, not so subtle prejudice on display there. While Craddock calls himself a gentleman, he's nothing more than a scoundrel. Gentlemen generally don't commit crimes. The hint is in the name. James Craddock was a brute, drinking and gambling his family's money away, so I have to assume that the name was given to him ironically. I'm so glad that Craddock really was a ghost, because the writers could have easily set up his descendant Russell as the alter ego of the Gentleman Ghost in some sort of Scooby-Doo story. That really would have disappointed me, so I'm relieved they didn't do that. There are lots of things to like about this episode. The supernatural world is introduced through Linton Midnight, also known as Papa Midnight, an immortal voodoo priest and rival to John Constantine. Apparently other supernatural characters such as Jason Blood and Madame Xanadu were considered before the writers settled on Papa Midnight, which I think is a sensible idea. The existence of Jason Blood immediately would have suggested the existence of Etrigan the demon, as the two are intrinsically linked. Madame Xanadu would have been fine, but I'm glad to see a more obscure character from the Hellblazer comics being used. Midnight gives Batman the means to defeat Craddock, but there is a price to be paid, and I really love Craddock's reaction when he realises who was responsible for defeating him. We have no idea what Midnight will do with Craddock, but it fills him with terror as he begs Batman not to turn him over, so it likely won't be good. Batman, oblivious to the implications, honours his deal with Midnight, and that may come back to haunt him later on. Likewise, I adore the idea that Craddock reveals after he possesses Alfred that he has been hiding a secret from Bruce. Bruce Timm has stated that they haven't come up with what the secret is just yet, only that it isn't that Alfred is Bruce's biological father. But I really love the idea that Alfred has been twisting himself up inside for years over something so potentially minor. Perhaps he saw the man who shot the Waynes leaving the alleyway that night and feels guilty for not stopping him. Maybe he accidentally broke one of Martha Wayne's china teacups and disposed of the evidence. He might have just eaten the last Rolo. Who knows? But I look forward to finding out in the future. Speaking of Alfred, it's this episode where the green shoots of Batman's humanity start to sprout. Craddock attempts to possess Batman, but Alfred jumps in the way, sacrificing himself. Yes, he does it out of love, but I think Alfred also realises that Batman is more likely to be able to deal with a possessed husky butler than he would be able to deal with a possessed Batman. Alfred begs Batman to kill him before he's forced to murder Batman by Craddock, again demonstrating that Alfred values Batman's life over his own. But Batman is able to expel Craddock. When Alfred comes to, Batman chastises him for daring to almost die, leaving him alone. Batman has been cold and dismissive of Alfred for the most part, a major point of contention for some fans, and almost losing him reminds him how much he cares for the old fool. This is the first crack in Batman's emotional armour, and there will be others. I also love the message of the episode, that it's the help someone Craddock would have looked down upon that was able to defeat him. One of Alfred's ancestors was a minor nobleman in England, and as such he had the noble blood necessary to perform the spell to stop Craddock. Just goes to show that at the end of the day you can't judge a book based on its cover, and how meaningless the whole notion of noble blood really is. Like all of the villains in this show, the Gentleman Ghost acts as a villainous reflection of Batman. James Craddock came from a well-to-do family, and when he lost everything, he resorted to a costumed identity to restore justice. Or what he thought was justice. In his case, this meant stealing from the poor to restore his own lost wealth. He is utterly detestable, taking from those that already have the least, with no redeeming qualities, and acts as a reminder of how far we have come as a society. I'm not sure what they're going to do with him going forward. Maybe he'll show up again in Season 2. But I look forward to finding out more in the future. Okay, that's it for this video essay. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all the usual YouTube stuff. If you'd like to hear more about Batman Caped Crusader, why not check out our podcast Totally Schway Flip Side, where my wife and I have gone through all 10 episodes. This is a spoiler-filled conversation about each episode in sequential order, so only check this out if you've watched the show or if you have no intentions of ever watching it yourself. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month, which will grant you early access to my video essays, and some supplementary perks like custom emojis, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, and community posts. And special thanks to my current channel members, who are all listed on the screen right now. Next time I'll be back to talk about the costumed villain that appears in the 7th episode, Moving Target. We're going to be talking about Caped Crusader's version of Onomatopoeia, and how not all evildoers have the courtesy of identifying themselves by putting on a costume. Hope to see you then.